Welcome to tonight's story, a journey beyond the clouds and into the quiet mysteries of the stars above. This is not a tale of thunder, nor of storms, but of a gentleman who learned to listen to the sky itself. His name was Zeus, though not the god of ancient myths, but a dreamer who lived by the rhythm of the night. Each evening while the village lights dimmed, he carried his gaze upward into the endless canvas of the heavens. The stars were his companions, silent, yet alive, flickering like messages written in a language of pure light. He was known as the Skywatcher, not because of power, but because of patience, wonder, and endless curiosity. Zeus never sought fame or fortune, only the simple comfort of knowing the sky always had more to reveal. With an old telescope by his side, he searched not for answers, but for the calm that questions could bring. The wind, the silence, and the silver glow became his teachers, guiding him deeper into their hidden stories. And so begins the tale of the Skywatcher Zeus, a man who found eternity not in conquest, but in watching. Part 1. The Silent Observer. Zeus lived on the edge of a small village, where the fields met the quiet breath of the open sky. His home was simple, built of stone and wood, but his heart always lingered beyond its narrow walls. Every evening, as shadows stretched long, he carried himself outside and turned his face upward. The sky was his true dwelling, a vast canvas painted new each night, always waiting for his return. People in the village knew him as quiet, almost too quiet, a man of few words and gentle gestures. Children often whispered about him, wondering why he chose to sit alone long after night had fallen. To them, sleep meant warmth and dreams, but to Zeus, the night meant questions yet unanswered. He was not restless nor lonely, but held by the spell of stars, a rhythm that soothed his soul. Zeus carried no burdens heavier than his telescope, a worn and scratched tool older than himself. The brass tubes were dulled with age, but the lenses still held clarity, a window into distant wonders. He would place it carefully upon a wooden stand and steady his breath before leaning in close. Through that circle of glass, whole galaxies appeared as delicate fires trembling against the dark. He watched patiently, never rushing, as if each star held a secret that would reveal itself in time. The constellations stretched across the sky, each one with a story older than the village itself. Orion stood tall, a pattern of hunters, while Cassiopeia rested in her throne of silver light. Yet for Zeus, these were not myths of pride or battle, but shapes that whispered gentle lessons. He spoke softly to himself, as if the stars could hear, sharing questions only the night could hold. Where do you come from? What do you see? Shining from so far, yet touching me here. His voice was not demanding, not seeking answers, but inviting silence to echo back its calm. The breeze moved through the grass, carrying his words away like drifting seeds into the dark. Some evenings, neighbors would pass by and pause, watching him sit with his telescope. They might shake their heads, puzzled, or smile kindly before walking on toward their homes. Zeus never explained himself. He never felt the need to justify the pull of the sky on his heart. He knew that wonder could not always be shared with words, only felt in the stillness of watching. In the quiet hours, when even the village dogs slept, Zeus became the only witness awake. The silence was complete, broken only by the soft creak of wood or the distant call of an owl. Under that silence, his mind opened wide, receiving the endless patience of the heavens above. The stars did not hurry, and so he too learned to sit still, breathing with the rhythm of the night. There were nights when clouds covered the sky, yet even then, he sat, waiting with steady calm. For him, the unseen was no less real, for he trusted the stars still burned behind the gray curtain. The sky, whether clear or veiled, always offered him something: mystery, patience, or quiet faith. And so his ritual never failed, as he kept his vigil under both brightness and shadow alike. He was not a prophet, nor a scholar, but a silent observer, a student of patterns and wonder. The villagers might not have known it, but their nights were watched, guarded in a way, by him. Zeus did not guard with weapons or walls, but with attention, with presence, with steady eyes. In his stillness, the sky found a companion, and the village found an unseen keeper of peace. Thus, each night, Zeus lived between earth and stars, neither belonging wholly to one or the other. The world below carried noise and labor, while the world above offered calm and infinity. He needed both, but it was the heavens that gave him his truest reflection, his quiet identity, and as dawn approached, he would rise slowly, carrying his telescope home, his heart filled again. Part 2. The Telescope of Memory. The telescope was more than a tool. It was a companion, a bridge between Zeus and the eternal sky. Its brass frame bore scratches, each one a silent mark of time, a history etched into the metal. No one in the village remembered where it had come from, but Zeus knew it carried many stories. It had been his grandfather's, a quiet man who too had wandered beneath the stars at night. As a child, Zeus often found him sitting outside, adjusting the telescope with patient hands. The old man never spoke much, but his eyes carried the same longing Zeus would later understand. When his grandfather passed, the telescope was left in a wooden chest, covered in dust and silence. Years later, Zeus found it again, lifting the lid as though opening a door to the past itself. Inside the case, he discovered not only the telescope but a small book of handwritten notes. The pages were fragile, filled with sketches of constellations and careful lines of thought. Some entries spoke of bright stars fading, others of comets crossing the horizon at dusk. But what caught Zeus's heart most were the small phrases, "Do not look for answers, look for wonder." Each time Zeus set up the telescope, he felt his grandfather's presence, gentle and reassuring. The weight of the instrument in his hands was more than metal. It was memory, a quiet inheritance. When he looked through its lens, he imagined the same stars had once filled his grandfather's gaze. It was as if the night itself remembered, holding the same lights across generations of watchers. The telescope was not perfect. Sometimes its lens fogged or shifted, blurring the stars. But Zeus never grew impatient, for he believed imperfection was part of the night's language. He polished the glass carefully, whispering to it as though it might understand his care. To him, the instrument was alive, breathing through the countless eyes that had looked within it. One evening, while adjusting the focus, Zeus noticed tiny carvings on the wooden tripod. Faint initials, barely visible, told of hands that had touched this telescope long ago. Perhaps his grandfather had carved them, or perhaps someone even earlier had left their mark. It felt like a chain of guardians, each one passing the gift of wonder to the next dreamer. Zeus began to keep his own journal, laying it beside the telescope before every night's vigil. He sketched the constellations as his grandfather had, but added his own quiet reflections. Some pages were filled with questions. Do stars dream of us? Is silence the language of light? Others were left blank, a space for the sky to answer in its own time, in its own way. The telescope, steady and enduring, became a symbol of patience and devotion in his life. It was not the clarity of the glass that mattered most, but the act of lifting his eyes upward. Through it, Zeus learned to see more than stars. He saw the line between memory and eternity. Each night he felt not alone, but surrounded by generations who had gazed at the same lights. To the villagers, it was only an old tool, heavy and strange, a relic of no practical value. But to Zeus, it was a doorway, a reminder that life is not measured only by days and duties. It showed him that wonder could be inherited, just as surely as land, name, or blood. And so, with each patient look, he honored not only the sky but the memory of those before him. The night seemed deeper when viewed through the telescope, as though inviting him to step inside. It was not escape, but connection, a way of belonging to something infinitely larger. And as he closed his journal one evening, he wrote a single line: "I am not the first, nor the last." The telescope of memory had taught him this truth, binding him gently to the endless watch. Part 3. Whispers of the Constellations. The night sky was never silent for Zeus, though no voice could be heard in the cool, still air. Each constellation spoke without words, shining as if carrying ancient thoughts from beyond time. Zeus often wondered if the stars whispered not to the ears but to the heart, quiet and unshaken. Their messages were not commands, nor warnings, but soft reminders of the vastness above. When he traced Orion's belt through the telescope, he felt a steady rhythm, a call to stand tall. The hunter did not appear fierce to him, but patient, waiting, strong without needing to fight. Cassiopeia's throne curved like an open hand, as though inviting him to rest and reflect. She seemed less a queen of vanity and more a guardian of balance, calm and eternal. Lyra shimmered as a harp of light, its stars forming strings stretched across invisible air. Zeus imagined its music was not sound, but feeling, notes that played directly within his chest. Each flicker carried weight, a vibration of joy, sorrow, or mystery that needed no translation. He sat still, letting the imagined melodies fill him, the night becoming a silent concert. At times, the constellations felt alive, as if turning their gaze back upon him in return. He wondered if they too sought connection, reaching across the endless void to find a listener. Perhaps their whispers were not secrets, but memories, traces of what had once burned bright. Every star, he thought, was both a story and a witness, keeping record of all it had seen. The villagers told old myths of gods, heroes, and battles written across the stars. Yet Zeus listened differently, hearing not war but tenderness, not pride but gentle endurance. He believed stories shifted over time, colored by the needs of those who told them. For him, the constellations were teachers, and their lessons were shaped by silence itself. One evening, as the wind grew still, he felt the stars press closer than before. The constellations seemed to breathe, their lines glowing with an energy that brushed his soul. It was not fear he felt, but belonging, as if the night accepted him as one of its own. He closed his eyes, and even then, the patterns burned bright behind his eyelids. Zeus often spoke to them softly, his words drifting into the quiet like threads of smoke. He did not ask for miracles, only for companionship in the endless space of thought. Sometimes he would whisper his worries, small as they were, to Orion or Cassiopeia, and in return, he found calm, as though the stars absorbed his words and gave him peace. On cloudless nights, when the constellations revealed their full arc, he felt surrounded. It was as though he sat not beneath the sky, but inside it, part of its eternal circle. He imagined himself seated among the lights, no longer bound to earth, but drifting free. The whispers then grew louder, a harmony of countless points, singing one silent hymn. His journal filled with sketches and notes, though words often failed to capture the feeling. How could ink describe the hush of stars, the soundless voice that shaped his very breath? Still, he wrote, for writing was his way of keeping the whispers alive through daylight. Every line on the page was a reminder that he was never truly alone in the night. The constellations gave him patience, teaching him that truth does not rush to be revealed. They showed him that beauty endures quietly, shining even when no one looks. They whispered of cycles, of rising and setting, of endings that were only beginnings. And as he listened, Zeus learned not to seek answers, but to live in the wonder itself. Thus, under the whispers of constellations, he found both guidance and friendship. The night became a library without books, its shelves made of light and silence. Zeus was no longer just a man watching stars. He was a listener of timeless stories. And with every whisper, he stepped deeper into the endless conversation of the cosmos. Part 4. The Village of Questions. The village lived by rhythm. Mornings of work, afternoons of trade, evenings of stories by the fire. Zeus moved quietly within it, known by face but seldom by voice, a figure apart yet familiar. Children watched him with curious eyes, whispering about the man who spoke more to stars than to people. Adults were more practical, shaking their heads at his strange habit of spending nights awake. In the market square, neighbors often asked each other, "What does he see that we do not?" Some thought he studied the sky for omens, as the old storytellers once claimed in their tales. Others believed he was lonely, filling silence with the company of constellations instead of friends. But there were a few who simply smiled, saying, "Perhaps he sees more because he looks longer." Zeus never corrected them, never explained his reasons, for he believed wonder needed no defense. When asked directly, he would offer only a gentle smile and say, "The sky is wide enough for all." His words confused some, comforted others, and left most shrugging before moving on with their tasks. He was content, for explanation was not his duty, only the quiet act of listening to the night. Children were the boldest, often running up to him when he carried the telescope home at dawn. "Did you see the moon walk?" one would ask, or "Did the stars tell you a secret tonight?" Zeus would crouch to meet their eyes, answering softly, "The sky always has secrets, if you listen." The children would giggle, unsure if he was joking, before running off with wide smiles. Their laughter was the closest thing to recognition he ever needed from the village. For while the adults dismissed his devotion, the young felt its quiet magic in their own way. To them, he was a keeper of mysteries, someone who dared to ask questions too big for words. Zeus carried that trust gently, knowing the seeds of wonder must be nurtured, never forced. Sometimes, at festivals, when songs filled the air, he would sit at the edge of the crowd. He was not unwelcome, but neither was he drawn into the circle of dancing and cheer. People would nod politely, but soon forget him as music and laughter carried the night. Zeus accepted it with ease, for his heart was never far from the sky waiting beyond. In quiet conversations, villagers speculated why he was different. Some said he had lost someone long ago and found comfort in the stars above. Others thought he sought answers to questions no book could hold, only the heavens. No explanation was fully believed, but each one carried a piece of possible truth. Yet there were also moments of quiet admiration, though rarely spoken aloud. Farmers, rising before dawn, sometimes saw him still seated, eyes fixed on fading constellations. They felt a strange respect, knowing it took devotion to greet the sky with such patience. In their hearts, some envied his freedom to wonder, though they would not admit it. Zeus, for his part, held no judgment for those who did not share his gaze. He believed every soul had its own sky, its own horizon, even if unseen by others. His role, as he saw it, was not to convince but simply to be present, a witness to the stars. And in that presence, he offered the village something rare, a reminder of silence and awe. Thus, the Village of Questions grew accustomed to their Skywatcher. He was both part of their world and, apart from it, familiar yet unknowable, though they did not fully understand. They accepted his place, like the moon's steady return. And Zeus, in turn, gave them the gift of mystery, carried quietly on his nightly watch. Part 5. The Star That Moved. The sky was a map Zeus had memorized, each star fixed like a note in a song he knew by heart. He could point to Orion's belt with his eyes closed, trace Cassiopeia without needing a glance. The constellations had become familiar companions, steady and predictable in their quiet arcs. But one night, as he adjusted the telescope, something broke the harmony he had always trusted. A small light moved differently, sliding across the dark with a grace that stars did not possess. It was not a plane, for there were none that passed over his quiet village in the mountains. Nor was it a falling star, for it did not streak and vanish, but glided with patient certainty. Zeus blinked, steadying his breath, watching as the light drifted slowly from one point to another. At first, he wondered if his eyes betrayed him, tired from hours of endless watching. He rubbed them gently, looked again, and still the light wandered across the velvet black. It seemed almost playful, darting slightly, pausing, then continuing as if following its own path. Unlike the stars, it felt alive, not bound to the rules he had always trusted in the heavens. Zeus felt no fear, only curiosity, a warmth rising in his chest as if invited into a secret. The night air grew still, as though the world itself was listening with him in that moment. He whispered softly, "Who are you, little light? Why do you walk when all others stay?" The moving star, though silent, felt as if it acknowledged him with its gentle, wandering glow. The villagers, if told, would have laughed, calling it a trick of tired eyes or shifting clouds. But Zeus knew the sky well, better than most knew their own streets and paths below. This was different, undeniable, a break in the ancient rhythm he had long trusted. It was as though the sky had chosen to show him a glimpse of something hidden. For nights after, he returned eagerly, eyes searching for the wandering star once more. Sometimes it appeared, faint but steady, moving across constellations like a quiet traveler. Other nights it was gone, leaving him to wonder if he had only dreamed its gentle glow. But when it returned, his heart lifted, certain he was part of a silent conversation. He began to keep special notes in his journal, marking the times when the light appeared. His sketches showed its path, weaving among the constellations like a thread of silver. He wrote beside them, "The star that does not stay, the guest of the sky, the one that moves." It became not only a mystery, but a friend, one he looked for each evening with new hope. As he watched, he realized the moving light was not random, but followed its own rhythm. It returned with patience, as though circling back to greet him when the night was kind. Zeus began to wonder if it sought not direction, but connection, a meeting point in the vastness. Each time it appeared, he felt less like a lone watcher and more like a welcomed companion. The moving star reminded him that the universe was not fixed, not unchanging. It was alive, shifting, offering surprises even to the patient observer. Where others saw repetition, Zeus saw renewal, a promise that wonder never ends. The sky was not only memory and tradition, but discovery, always ready to unveil more. He did not chase answers, for he knew some questions were meant to linger like starlight. Instead, he let the mystery breathe, savoring the joy of simply being present. The star that moved had become his reminder. The universe was not still, but endlessly alive. And under its gentle path, Zeus smiled, knowing the sky still had secrets left to share. Part 6. The Whispering Wind. The nights grew longer, and Zeus found himself listening not only to the stars, but to the air around him. The wind carried its own voice, subtle and shifting, brushing through trees and across the silent rooftops. Sometimes it came as a soft sigh, like a memory passing. Other times as a hum, steady and low. He began to wonder if the wind itself was trying to speak, carrying secrets from beyond the horizon. When the moving star appeared, he noticed the wind would often change, almost as if responding. A breeze would rise suddenly, circling him gently, then fade once the wandering light was gone. Zeus could not explain it, yet he felt certain the two were connected, a dialogue beyond his grasp. The wind was no longer background, it was a messenger, weaving its whispers into the night. One evening, as he adjusted the telescope, a sudden gust lifted his journal pages into the air. He hurried to catch them, but stopped when one page landed flat against the ground before him. On it, the sketches of the moving star seemed to shimmer in the pale moonlight. He felt the wind pause, waiting, almost as if urging him to notice something deeper. Zeus spoke softly into the night. "If you carry words, let me learn your language." The leaves rustled, the branches swayed, and the air moved in circles around his chair. It was not an answer in words, but a rhythm, a pattern that felt almost like intention. Zeus closed his eyes, listening carefully, letting the sound of the wind become its own kind of speech. Night after night, he practiced this listening, allowing the breeze to guide his thoughts. He noticed how the tone shifted with the seasons, sharp in winter, gentle in spring. He marked how it stirred when the star appeared, like a chorus welcoming its wandering guest. Zeus was no longer only a watcher. He had become a listener, attuned to the unseen. The villagers noticed his habit of standing still with eyes closed, arms at his side. Some shook their heads, muttering about strange ways and wasted time. But the children copied him playfully, closing their eyes and pretending to hear secrets in the air. They laughed, but Zeus smiled, knowing even play carried a seed of wonder. One boy, braver than the rest, asked him, "What do you hear when the wind speaks?" Zeus answered gently, "I hear that the world is alive, and it wants us to notice." The boy's eyes widened, and though he could not understand fully, he remembered the words. Sometimes, simple sentences could last longer than explanations, echoing for years to come. Zeus wrote in his journal, "The wind does not speak in words, but in reminders of presence." He saw it as a bridge between earth and sky, carrying messages too subtle for ordinary ears. The moving star and the whispering wind became companions, each adding depth to his nights. They turned the silence of darkness into a conversation, one without beginning or end. As he listened, he felt less like an observer and more like part of the universe itself, not separate, not alone, but woven into a vast, breathing tapestry of motion and light. The wind was no longer empty air, it was a thread, connecting him to what lay beyond sight. And Zeus, with quiet joy, knew he had learned to hear what many never thought to notice. So the nights continued, and with them, the whispers. The wind's voice taught him patience, presence, and the art of listening without demand. Zeus understood that not all answers are given. Some are only shared through stillness, and in that stillness, he found a truth deeper than words. The world itself was speaking. Part 7. The Forgotten Observatory. One afternoon, Zeus wandered further than usual, following a narrow path lined with wildflowers and stone. The villagers rarely used this trail, for it wound upward into the hills where silence deepened. At the top, half hidden by ivy and moss, stood a crumbling structure older than any home nearby. Its dome was cracked, its windows clouded, yet something about it called to him with quiet strength. Zeus stepped closer, brushing leaves aside, revealing worn carvings around the arched entrance. The designs were faded, but he could see suns, moons, and swirling patterns of stars etched in stone. He pushed the door gently, and with a groan it opened, revealing the dust of forgotten time. Inside, the air smelled of wood and paper, and the faint scent of rain that had slipped through cracks. Books lay scattered, their pages yellowed, some unreadable, others filled with sketches of constellations. An old telescope stood in the center, tall but rusted, its lens clouded yet still pointed to the sky. Zeus felt as though he had stepped into a room where someone had paused and never returned. It was not abandoned. It was waiting, patient, holding its secrets until another listener arrived. He moved slowly, touching the desk where journals were stacked in uneven towers. Opening one carefully, he saw neat handwriting, notes about stars and planets long observed. There were diagrams of eclipses, predictions of comets, and questions left unanswered in the margins. He traced the ink with his finger, feeling the presence of a mind that had once wondered like him. The walls were lined with charts, maps of the heavens drawn with delicate detail. Some constellations were familiar, but others were patterns he had never seen before. Symbols marked certain stars, and beneath them words like messenger, traveler, and returning one. His heart raced. Was this place once home to someone who, too, had seen the moving star? As evening fell, light streamed through the broken dome, casting golden patterns on the floor. Dust shimmered like tiny galaxies, swirling gently in the glow, a sky within the walls. Zeus set his journal beside the old ones, a gesture of quiet respect to the unknown observer. He whispered, "I see you. I hear you. We are watching the same sky, across different times." He returned night after night, carrying tools to clean and mend what little he could. He polished the lens until stars shone again, though faint through the scratches of age. He swept the floor, set books in order, and lit a lantern that filled the room with warmth. The observatory was no longer forgotten. It lived again through his patient care. Zeus began to read the journals in depth, tracing the journey of the one who came before. The writer spoke of listening to the wind, of a star that did not stay, of voices in silence. It was as though the words were his own, written generations apart, yet echoing the same truth. Zeus realized he was not alone in his wonder, but part of a lineage of Skywatchers. This discovery filled him with quiet joy, deeper than he had ever known. The sky was vast, yes, but so too was the chain of hearts that had looked upward. He was one among many, connected not by time or place, but by devotion to the infinite. The observatory became his second home, a place of both memory and promise. When the villagers asked where he disappeared to, he only smiled. How could he explain that he had found not just an old dome, but a doorway to belonging? The stars above were no longer distant, for their stories were written on the walls around him. And as he closed his eyes one night, he knew the sky had guided him to where he was meant to be. Part 8. The Visitor. One evening, as twilight settled, Zeus found the observatory's door already ajar. The lantern he left inside glowed faintly, casting warm light across the scattered books. At first, he thought the wind had shifted it, but then he heard footsteps on the old floor. A figure stood by the telescope, tracing its frame with gentle, curious hands. She turned as he entered, a young woman with eyes wide like the night sky itself. There was no fear in her gaze, only recognition, as though she had expected him. Zeus paused, unsure whether to speak, but the silence between them felt almost familiar. Finally, she said softly, "I thought I was the only one who came here." Her name was Lyra, a traveler who had wandered from a distant village beyond the hills. She too had been drawn by the ruins, led by stories whispered of a dome in the forest. Like Zeus, she spent her nights gazing upward, charting stars and listening to the wind. She smiled as she showed him her journal, filled with drawings and notes of constellations. Zeus felt a quiet joy stir within him, realizing he was no longer the lone Skywatcher. They spoke little at first, choosing instead to share silence as they watched the horizon darken. When the first stars appeared, Lyra adjusted the telescope with practiced, steady hands. She whispered, "They've been waiting for us." And he felt her words as truth, not poetry. Night after night, Lyra returned, and together they restored the observatory's broken heart. She scrubbed the dust from shelves, arranged the scattered maps, and lit the lantern with care. Zeus polished the telescope, aligning it so the stars glimmered sharper than before. The forgotten dome became alive once more, warmed by shared hands and shared wonder. Their conversations deepened slowly, like rivers carving stone, patient and unhurried. Lyra told of her grandmother, who had spoken of a wandering star that carried messages. Zeus shared his own notes, showing her the moving light that danced across the constellations. When they compared sketches, their paths aligned, confirming they had both seen the same star. It was not coincidence, they realized, but a call answered by two hearts across distance. They laughed softly at the thought, marveling that the sky could weave lives together. The villagers noticed Zeus was no longer alone in his evening journeys. Some whispered with curiosity, others smiled knowingly. But Zeus and Lyra cared little for gossip. Together they began charting the star's movement, marking its slow arc across months. They named it the Messenger, a traveler that carried silence as its only language. Every appearance felt like a blessing, every absence a test of patience and faith. The wind itself seemed to approve, brushing their shoulders whenever the light returned. Zeus felt something new blossom within him, not only wonder, but belonging. For the first time, he shared his listening, his watching, his endless questions. Lyra did not answer them, but echoed them, and in that echo he found harmony. The sky, once a solitary companion, now stretched wide enough for two. One evening, under a crescent moon, Lyra placed her hand gently over his journal. She said, "Perhaps the sky does not want us to solve it, only to keep asking together." Zeus nodded, smiling, his heart lighter than it had ever been. The stars shimmered above them, and the observatory, once forgotten, now breathed with life again. Part 9. The Messenger's Return. Autumn painted the hills in amber and gold as the days shortened and nights grew sharper. Zeus and Lyra spent more hours within the observatory, warmed by lanterns and quiet conversation. Each evening they charted the star they called the Messenger, its return promised by old notes. The air felt thick with anticipation, as though the dome itself knew what was about to come. One night, clouds veiled the sky, and the pair sat in patient silence, listening to rain on stone. Lyra spoke of her grandmother's words, that the messenger was not only a light, but also a guide. Zeus listened carefully, feeling that the stories and his visions were weaving into one tapestry. When the storm cleared, a crisp silence followed, sharp enough to hear their hearts beating. And then, there it was, the messenger star, brighter than either had ever seen before. It pulsed faintly, as if breathing, not just light, but presence, a rhythm reaching into their bones. Zeus held his breath, struck by a sense of recognition deeper than thought or reason. Lyra whispered, "It has come closer." her voice trembling yet steady with awe. The star's path was no longer random. It traced deliberate arcs across constellations like brushstrokes. They sketched quickly, hands trembling as though recording a living voice before it faded. Each night it returned, shimmering with strange patterns, brighter than even the moon at times. The villagers, curious, gathered outside the observatory, marveling at the glow above the hills. Some called it a blessing, others a sign, but no one could deny its beauty or mystery. Zeus and Lyra became guides, showing the villagers how to trace the star's arc in the sky. Children laughed, pointing eagerly, while elders nodded with reverence, whispering prayers. The messenger had become not only theirs, but a gift shared with the entire village. Yet, within Zeus's heart, a deeper question stirred like a shadow beneath the light. Why had it returned now, brighter than ever, after generations of silence? Was it seeking something, or was it simply answering their patient watching? He shared these doubts with Lyra, who only smiled and said, "Perhaps both." The journals in the observatory spoke of signs, of alignment, of a time when the messenger descended. Zeus and Lyra read them together, puzzling over symbols of spirals and gates. Some pages described voices carried on wind, not in words, but in feelings of calm and wonder. Others ended abruptly, as though the writer had run out of time to finish. One evening, as they stood together under the dome, the star flared unexpectedly. The room filled with a soft glow, as though the light had seeped through the telescope itself. The lantern seemed unnecessary, for the air shimmered with a faint silver sheen. Zeus felt the presence more strongly than ever, not outside, but within him. Lyra reached for his hand, steadying him as the air vibrated with unspoken music. Neither spoke, yet they both understood. The messenger was not only to be watched, but answered. Their journals lay open on the desk, pages fluttering, though no wind stirred the room. It was as though the light itself was reading their words, their hopes, their endless questions. When the brilliance softened, the night returned to stillness, stars twinkling like curious eyes. Zeus exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath for what felt like eternity. Lyra whispered, "It hurt us," her voice filled with reverence and certainty. For the first time, Zeus felt the line between watcher and watched blur into one. The messenger had returned, brighter and nearer, not as a mystery alone, but as a companion. The question was no longer whether it would come, but what it wished to share. And in their hearts, they knew the journey of watching was shifting into something new. The sky was no longer distant. It had stepped closer, carrying with it a promise of connection. Part 10. The sky listens back. Winter crept softly over the hills, cloaking the village in frost and long nights. The observatory, once forgotten, now glowed each evening with lanterns and quiet voices. Zeus and Lyra kept watch together, their journals filled with lines of light and silence. The messenger star returned faithfully, brighter, nearer, as though waiting for their reply. One night, the air felt sharper, charged, humming, as though the sky itself leaned closer. Zeus stood by the telescope, heart racing, while Lyra traced constellations with steady fingers. Suddenly, the messenger pulsed 3 long flares, then silence, then 3 again. It was rhythm, a pattern, not chance, but intention, like the heartbeat of the cosmos. They looked at each other, breathless, knowing without speaking that this was not random. The star was speaking not in words, but in repetition, in light stitched across the dark. Lyra whispered, "It listens, it answers." Her eyes shimmered with awe and quiet certainty. Zeus felt the truth of her words settle deep, like a bell's resonance in his bones. The villagers gathered outside, pointing at the flares that pierced the night sky. Children laughed and clapped, elders prayed, and the hills echoed with hushed wonder. For the first time, the entire village became skywatchers, bound by the same light. The messenger had united them, weaving a shared story beneath the silent heavens. Inside the observatory, Zeus and Lyra wrote furiously, marking every pulse, every pause. They drew lines, counted beats, traced the rhythm as though learning a forgotten language. Patterns emerged spirals, repetitions, sequences that hinted at something greater. It was not chaos, but order, the careful hand of a message written in light. Days turned to weeks, and their journals filled with diagrams of the cosmic code. Zeus often wondered aloud if they were deciphering a voice, or simply joining its song. Lyra believed it was both, that the act of watching was itself part of the dialogue. And so, they watched, listened, and answered in silence, heart steady as the stars above. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, the messenger burned brighter than ever before. Its light filled the dome, seeping through stone and wood, wrapping them in silver glow. The air vibrated, not with fear, but with warmth, as though the sky itself embraced them. Zeus closed his eyes, hearing music where no sound existed, a melody carried in light. Lyra squeezed his hand, and in that silence, they both understood the gift given to them. The sky was not distant. It was alive, patient, listening, and willing to be heard. Their watching had not been in vain. It was part of a dialogue older than memory. The observatory was no longer just stone and books. It was a bridge between worlds. When the light dimmed, the stars still shone, steady and calm. Like a friend at rest, Zeus opened his journal, writing the words slowly. The sky listens back. Lyra leaned over, adding beneath it, and it speaks through silence and light. Together, they closed the book, knowing it held more than records, it held belonging. The villagers outside lingered, gazing upward, some with tears, others with smiles. The messenger had given them hope, not through answers, but through presence. Zeus and Lyra stood at the door, watching their people join in the endless listening. The sky had always been vast, but now it felt intimate, closer than a whisper. And so, the Skywatcher Zeus was no longer alone, for the stars had answered. Not with words, but with rhythm, with light, with an unbroken thread of connection. The journey was not finished, it was only beginning, written across the infinite night. The heavens had listened, and in their glow, Zeus and Lyra found home in the cosmos.